have been baited by the glinting eyes of the Riot Games' massive multiplayer online role-playing game.
Meaning it is time to talk about Riot's MMO again. Also, I'm washing all my hoodies and I only have the grey one. I feel like a different person. So, it's been a little bit since we did our last checkup on this magnificent yet alive project from Riot Games. Well, actually, it's been 4 weeks since the last news that affected the Riot MMO. But against the odds, we are back, and there are more things that we can talk about. And this time, the topic is very specific. Because not only did we get some reactions from Riot to topics that talked about specific game designs, but there is also a new beast that is riling up in the space of MMOs, and Riot might have to deal with it. So, the news arrived in the form of another MMO failing. Yes, again. Yes, this has been a little bit of a reoccurring phenomenon in the space of MMOs these days. Because literally every new MMO that arrives either dies a few months after it arrives, or it dies before its own arrival. New World didn't exactly deliver on the living fantasy world idea. Project Ghost burned right after all the testing phases. Ashes of Creation also burned down because they spent all the Kickstarter money on luxury items. And so up to this point, it's been the Riot MMO that's been the last titan standing, or at least the idea of it is standing. Which naturally made a lot of people doubt that the Riot MMO is ever going to come out. And unfortunately for Riot, it is not like they can exactly confirm that they are still working on it, because before they do that, it would be a good idea to officially announce the MMO first. And so, from the information we got, the Riot MMO is still going. And in fact, they are hiring more veterans to help out with it. And so from the breadcrumbs we got, it seems like the dev team behind the Riot MMO is very healthy. And most importantly for us, it seems like Riot is still aiming for the release of 2030 at the latest. So 3.5 years to go. The thing is, as we mentioned, keeping an MMO alive like this is very rare in today's world. Because the most played MMOs, as well as the only really living MMOs, are the veteran MMOs that stick to the good old formulas. And because people are already attached to the old MMOs, it is hard to release a new MMO and make people want to jump onto that one. Not to mention that in the vast majority of the modern MMOs, the design is not exactly the classic RPG experience that people want. In most cases, we are talking about what is called an instanced MMO, where you play with other players, but you don't really get the massive scale. And well, this is what leads into the latest event, which is also something that will eventually dribble down to the Riot MMO. With the news being that another MMO has died. Yes, really. And this time, Amazon Games are letting go of the new Lord of the Rings MMO, which was announced in 2023, so after 3 years of development, it's gone. And it kinda makes sense why. I mean, Amazon Games were behind New World, which didn't exactly have a great time. So it is possible that Amazon, as a publisher, is kinda done with the MMO space. Now, what is kinda funny and not depressive at all is that in the same announcement, they also cancelled an AI-generated game called Project Trident, and they announced that the entire company will be now exploring generative AI. Now, where is the really funny part? The old Lord of the Rings MMO is still standing. Now, the way these news eventually dribbled down to the Riot MMO is through Twitter. Again. You see, after this announcement was made, people started talking about the state of MMOs, pointing out how MMOs these days are just done. Because all people wanna really play is the minigames like in Fortnite and Roblox, and that's your multiplayer experience. And how this quick-styled gameplay is the vast majority of the social gameplay. In fact, these games are 90% social media and 10% gameplay. End of quote. Now, the truth is that I am a little bit knowledgeable on this topic because I started playing WoW when I was 12. I am now 31, I am old, thank you for asking. In fact, between making this video and making my own video game and starting other projects and being a father, I am trying to be relevant in the Burning Crusade, and yes, I sank an unholy number of hours into Classic WoW on multiple accounts. Anyway, I can tell you that during the good old days of ancient MMOs, the 90% social network and 10% gameplay is exactly what MMOs were always about. I mean, the design of Classic WoW relies on you finding other people to do group activities with. So you have to be social, or at least you have to participate in the social activities to progress. And after you reach the end game, 90% of your time is the preparations for the raid and managing people and managing schedules and putting together the raid. And after that you have the 10% of gameplay which is actually raiding. So if you try to compare apples to apples here, the Roblox design is actually what MMOs have been doing the entire time. And ever since those old days, it always worked. The difference is that Roblox is just aiming for a much younger audience, with the gameplay also being far more questionable. But apparently, Roblox is slowly declining these days because they are not exactly treating their player base well. And so who knows, maybe the Titan will fall eventually. I mean, they all did before them. Anyway, the point is that this then started a conversation, which also summoned people opposing this. People that share the view that I just shared with you. I have a completely contrary opinion. The MMO is still in 2026 the holy grail of gaming. Look at all the current MMOs. There isn't a single one that in 2004 would make me envious. And other important markers demonstrate that there is still huge interest. New Worlds, The Release, Star Citizen, and so on. And yes, I do agree with this, and it is the same thing that I mentioned in some of the previous Riot MMO videos. The modern MMOs are actually quite far away from the original massive multiplayer online design. In fact, because the modern MMOs are so different, there is a reason why the audience always clings to the two big dogs. Classic WoW in whatever form it may be now, and, surprisingly, old school RuneScape, proving that the old MMO design is still peak. On top of this, it was proven that it is not just nostalgia, because as these two games have their highs and lows, sometimes the RuneScape players try WoW and they stick with it, and other times the WoW players try RuneScape for the first time and stay there too. And since both of them are very classic MMOs with totally different experiences, you can see where the overlap is. In fact, we also have people that have never played WoW before and now they have an entire series that is very popular. Now, would this actually happen if Classic WoW was more of a modern MMO? Likely not, and that's because modern MMOs are not really simulating fantasy worlds. They usually simulate a Diablo-styled looter, where you can sometimes see other players running around the world. And so now you have the core MMO audience that is still hungering for some kind of a classic experience, and the best part is that the executive producer behind the Riot MMO replied to this with the trademark eyes. Now, does this mean that the Riot MMO is gonna go back to the classic design of the early 2000s MMOs? Possibly, but it's definitely not guaranteed. You see, a few years ago when the Riot MMO went through the big reset, Riot confirmed it happened because they wanted to change the direction of the game. So either they were trying to make a new modern MMO and they saw it wasn't really working and so they went back to the classic designs, or they started making a classic MMO, they realized they weren't doing anything new and so they tried to spice it up. And right now, I really hope they are staying closer to the classic designs. Because that is the formula that the players seemingly really want. That is what the MMO audience is craving right now. And Riot definitely has the power to deliver on it. Which then brings up a question. If this is the experience that the MMO audience was, with Classic WoW sitting right there, with a lot of people still returning to it, why don't they just stay happy in Classic WoW? Well, simply said, it is because the old design is great, but nothing new ever happens there. Yet. You see, there seems to be a bit of a Titan arriving. Because just as the Riot MMO is very slowly approaching, at the same time, from some of the teasers, it seems like Blizzard is trying to do the same thing. Recently, they flew a bunch of Classic WoW creators into their headquarters, on top of which they previously confirmed that the Classic WoW team is working on new things, which might include a plus. The team recently shut down some private servers which were handling more content for Classic WoW, which is exactly what Blizzard did before they launched Classic WoW. And so now the chances are really high that next year or the year after that, Classic WoW Plus might actually become real. Which, if you don't have the context, might be one of the most hyped up moments in the MMO space. And if the stars align perfectly, Riot might have to compete with a titan that millions of players are waiting in line for. I mean, when the initial Classic WoW released, it broke all the records and it brought WoW back to the 10 million subscribers, which is close to the highest peaks WoW ever had. And that is what Riot should be taking into account. Because people are going to compare the crap out of these MMOs. If the Riot MMO ends up being one of the modern MMOs, if it beats Classic WoW, then Riot is gonna pull off one of the biggest achievements in the MMO space. But if it fails, it is once again gonna prove that the old MMO design just works. And if both of these end up being classic MMO designs, then be ready for hell being unleashed on the internet. Because the fandoms of the Riot MMO and the Classic WoW Plus are gonna be worse than the old console wars.